Best thing, because I get that as Hello, good morning. It's Candy Gourlay. Well, you probably know who's talking, right? You've been watching all those ads on Twitter all this time. Hello to all the schools who have come along. And if you're watching this later, hello to you too. I'm here to tell you all about how I became a writer and to talk about, well, what were the things that made me want to tell stories and how I learned to do it? And I thought that I would start by, oh wait, I should show you the books that I've written, right? So these are my books. Tall Story is about a boy who turns into a giant. Shine is a ghost story. Bone Talk is a bit of history you haven't heard of before. It's about when the United States invaded the Philippines, where I came from. A wild Song follows on from that. Is It a Mermaid? Is about a creature who thinks that she is a mermaid. Ferdinand is about an explorer who was the first guy to circumnavigate the earth, except he didn't really. Mike Falls Up is about a boy who falls through an earthquake crack and then comes out in London. And what is the most important part of a story? What is the thing that is going to get us going when we tell a story? Well, what else but once upon a time. Once upon a time. I thought that it was just like something that began every story that I'd ever heard. But in fact, it's a really important concept in storytelling. Once upon a time, there was a boy named Luke Skywalker. He lived on a planet called Tatooine. Now, do you know Luke Skywalker? Do you know what Luke Skywalker's job was? I bet somebody in there, some of you know what that job is. Well, I'm going to tell you because I can't be in the room with you. His job was, he was a farmer. What kind of farmer was Luke Skywalker? Does anybody know over there? When I visit schools, usually there's somebody in the back who raises his hand and actually knows. It's a very tricky question. He is a moisture farmer. Moisture. Does that sound exciting? No, it's boring. Luke Skywalker had the most boring job ever. And that is his once upon a time. Once upon a time, there was a boy who had a really, really boring job. And every night he would go out in Tatooine in the desert and stare up at the two moons rising over Tatooine and dream of flying spaceships and having adventures. But he couldn't because he was a moisture farmer. Once upon a time. Once upon a time, there was a little boy named Harry Potter. And Harry Potter was about to go off on this incredible adventure. He was going to go to the best magical boarding school ever called Hogwarts. But his once upon a time was different. Do you remember where Harry Potter begins? Where is Harry Potter at the very, very beginning, before he goes on an adventure? Where did he sleep? He slept in a cupboard under the stairs. And here is poor Harry looking out the grate and thinking, is this my life? Is this all that I'm ever going to have? That was his once upon a time. And once upon a time, a long, long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, there was a little girl named Candy. And she was growing up in a country called the Philippines. Where is the Philippines? You don't know where the Philippines is? Maybe somebody in the class knows. But I'm going to tell you, because I'm not in your classroom and I can't hear you answering. I'm going to tell you. If you had a giant barbecue stick and you stuck it in the middle of the Philippines, it will come out on the other side of the world, in London. That's where the Philippines is. It's on the other side of the world. And it's daytime in England right now, but it's nighttime in the Philippines. And when you fly to the Philippines from England to visit your family like I do, you're flying to tomorrow, because in the Philippines, it's already tomorrow. You're like Doctor Who, you're time traveling. And this is me with my sister. That's my sister Joy. She used to be bigger than me, but now I'm a lot bigger than her. When we were little, she used to hit me on the head with that plastic golf club. And here we are. And for a while, it was just me and Joy. And then my parents, for some reason, decided to have more children. And so we had 2 more siblings. That little boy over there, that's Randy. Randy grew up to become a video producer. He makes videos for companies now. Boring. And then my sister, the little girl over there, that's my sister Mia. And Mia is a really fun person because she didn't hit me over the head with a golf club. Mia is now an architect and an urban planner. So she builds these incredible things. She's amazing. I love my sister Mia. She doesn't hit me on the head. And then my parents, for some reason, they decided to have 2 more children. I mean, do some of you have big families? Are you like me? Do you have 6 children in the family? Well, my parents decided to have 2 more boys. And here we all are together. Those are my parents in front. That's my mom. That's my dad in front of the picture. And in the picture, you can see Joy is in the shorts on the left. That's me. And the second person is me. I think I look like myself still. And then the third person in the red t-shirt, that's my baby brother, Armand. Armand became an animator. He's a great artist. Then there's my sister, Mia, who became an architect. And my brother in the other striped t-shirt, that's Andre. Andre became an art teacher, and Randy, who looks very, very cross in the picture. And you notice we are kind of a very arty family. I didn't tell you what Joy became when she grew up. She became a rock singer. She painted her hair green and wore fishnet stockings and danced on top of tables and performed all over Southeast Asia. She was a bit scary. She got rid of that plastic golf club eventually. Anyway, we had a great childhood. There were 6 of us, so there was never any need for playmates because there were so many of us. And growing up, we lived in an era which is very, very different to your time now. You know, we lived in a time before there was the internet. I know that your grandparents probably say, I remember when there was no internet. Well, I remember when there was no internet. And one of the things that happens when there is no internet is you can't just Google stuff. So what happened in our household was we always had newspapers. Every day, my dad would go out and buy a newspaper. Now, newspapers are fun. Eventually, I learned how to like reading the newspaper. But when I was a kid, I didn't really enjoy reading the news. But at the back of every newspaper were comics, like an entire sheet of comics. And that was what I loved. As soon as the newspaper came through the door, I would take it and go straight to the back and start reading comics. And I just want to show you my all-time favorite comic strip. It was Peanuts. It was called Peanuts. But the hero of Peanuts was a boy named Charlie Brown. He's this kid here with a t-shirt with a jagged pattern on it, and he had a big round head. And one of the things I loved about Charlie Brown was that he was kind of a loser. So he was a bit of a sad character. Everything went wrong for him, which kind of was what was funny about the story. And he had this dog named Snoopy who had a lot of personality. And I loved reading Charlie Brown. Every day I would turn to Charlie Brown and read the comics. And it was like, I thought it was the best thing ever. And then little by little, reading Charlie Brown, I noticed something about the comics. Now look at this example, for example. So here you have Charlie Brown playing marbles with Schroeder. I don't know, do kids still play marbles today? You make a big circle on the ground, you lay out your marbles, and you try to knock out each other's marbles on the ground. So there's Charlie Brown playing with Schroeder, and you see along comes Lucy, the little girl with the black hair, and Lucy says, "Can I play?" And in the middle of the cartoon, you can see Charlie Brown says, "Oh, okay, you can play." And Lucy tries, but she can't. And then she has a tantrum, and she destroys their circle. And it's funny. It's funny. I don't know why it's funny, but it is. But what I noticed was that the story began in the middle of the comic. Look at the very, very middle of that comic. It's the moment when Charlie Brown says, "Okay, you can come and play marbles with us." And suddenly everything begins to go wrong. The story begins in the middle. So look, let's go back. Oh, I went the wrong way. So let me go back there. Look at this one. This is Snoopy has a fever. And so Charlie Brown asks the advice of the vet, and the vet says, take his temperature. So he puts a thermometer in Snoopy's mouth. And in the middle of the frame, a bird arrives. I don't know if you know the Snoopy comics. The bird's name is Woodstock. And Woodstock sits on the thermometer, and when Charlie Brown checks it, he hasn't got a temperature at all because Woodstock has cold feet. And when does that begin? At the very middle of the comic, you can see Woodstock arriving. That's the moment when the story begins. And isn't that amazing? I was learning about story structure a long time ago when I was still a little girl reading these comics. I was learning something really important that I now use every time I write a story. So a story structure, usually stories are built into 3 acts. Part 1, part 2, part 3. The first part is when you introduce stuff. The middle part, things happen. The third part is the ending. But in the middle, look at this chart that I've got here, 3-act structure. Right in the middle is a point called the midpoint. That is the moment when the story turns, like the engine of the story revs up. So for example, have you seen that movie Jurassic Park? Jurassic Park. Remember that movie? It begins with them coming to this leisure park, this park where actual dinosaurs are on display. And the whole first half of the movie, they're safe because there's this beautiful fence. In the very middle of the movie, the fence comes down. And suddenly they're not safe, they're running away. It becomes a horror movie. That is the midpoint, that middle of the movie. And it's really, if you're writing a story, it's really great to know about the midpoint. So for example, if your teacher said, write a story on this sheet of paper, just this long, so write a whole story, you know that your story should begin right in the middle, so you can introduce things, describe things. But when you get to the middle, the story better begin, okay? And when I create picture books, those are the books with illustrated books like this book that I wrote over here in the, I will take 12 sheets of paper because that's how long picture books are, 12 sheets of paper. I'll fold it in half. I'll take my giant stapler, staple it in the middle, and then I'll begin writing my picture book. There's the cover, and I'll have the staple in the middle. I'll open it to the middle, and that is where my story is going to begin. And that's how I plan writing my stories. The other thing that's really exciting about the time when I was still a little girl and there was no internet, well, maybe it wasn't so exciting, was that we had door-to-door book salesmen. You see, in the Philippines, in those days, there weren't that many bookstores. We'd go to the bookstores. I loved going to bookstores, but there weren't very many of them. Maybe I think there were 2 or 3. And when we got to the bookstores, all the books were really expensive because they were imported from other countries. So expensive, we couldn't afford to buy books in those days. But what we had were door-to-door salesmen. So there would be these men who would knock on the door. They wore black suits, and they would be carrying big black suitcases. And they'd come into our living rooms, open the suitcases, and they would be filled with books. And they would sell us books in our own living rooms. And one of my favorite books that we bought from, well, sets of books that we bought from a door-to-door salesman was this set. I think it's called the Junior Classics. And they were like a set of books with excerpts from the best stories that were available in the world at the time. New stories, old stories. And when I was a little girl, not having that many books at home, I just loved it. I read all of these books from cover to cover. And in fact, many years later, when I was a grown-up, I went home to visit my mom, and I saw the books on her bookcase. Do you know what I did? I stole them. I took them back to London with me. So, over maybe 3 visits to the Philippines, I packed the books into my suitcase and took them back to England. So I've got my favorite books here in England with me. And in fact, I brought one to show you. So this is from the Young Shelf of Books, Collier's Junior Classics. And I wanted to show you one of my favorite stories. It was a book called 21 Balloons. And here is by William Penne Dubois. And William Penn du Bois was an artist illustrator who lived in San Francisco. And he wrote this story about a man who goes away in a hot air balloon. And here are the people pointing up at the sky as he flies off. I put little pink markers so that I could see. And then at some point in his journey, the man finds that his balloon begins to sink. And so he's terrified that he's going to crash. So he begins throwing his furniture out of his house. But it doesn't help. He crashes into an island called Krakatoa. And when he gets to Krakatoa, he finds a secret village of people. And they live there mining a diamond mine in the mountain of Krakatoa. Now, if you've ever heard that name before, Krakatoa, you will know that it's a very famous volcano. And at a certain point, that famous volcano erupted. It was one of the biggest explosions in the world. And that is coming down the line for this story. But to find out what happens next, you've got to finish reading it. So this book is so precious to me. I keep it. It's kind of fragile now because it's been in floods. It's traveled really, really far. Another one of my favorite books was this book, The Children's Classic. It's another one that I stole from my mother, and you can see it's suffered a little bit. It's really, really old. This is the Andersen's Fairy Tales. And I loved Andersen's Fairy Tales. I don't think I would have discovered it if it hadn't been for these books that were bought from door-to-door salesmen. They had these fantastic drawings. And when I was a child, I used to want to become an artist, and I would copy the drawings and draw them over. Every day I would be drawing a different picture. Here, this is a story about a dog with eyes the size of big cups. Incredible. But my favorite book in this series was the story of Tom Sawyer. So this is the story of Tom Sawyer. Tom Sawyer was a book written by an author called Mark Twain. And he was like the classic naughty boy. He spent all his time running away. His best friend was another naughty boy named Huckleberry Finn. And it was written a long time ago, I think in the 1870s. So it has a lot of values that are old, from that era. And so you have to read it and carefully study whether these values match your own. But I loved Tom Sawyer. He had so many adventures. One of the things he did was he ran away from home, built a raft, and ran away with his friends, and they were having such a great adventure. They didn't know that everybody thought that they had drowned in the river. And so a funeral was held for them. And Tom Sawyer sneaks back and attends his own funeral. I just think it's beautiful. I reread it recently, and it's still as beautiful as I remember it. And so reading all these amazing books, I just knew what I wanted to be when I grew up. I wanted to become an author. This is what I looked like when I was still cute. I knew that I wanted to become an author because falling in love with books, reading books, whenever I read books, I had hairs rose on my arms and I lost myself in the adventure of the book. And I wanted to write books that were just like these books. I wanted to make children feel the way I felt when I read books. But of course, real life isn't like that. You don't just say, I'm going to be an author, and then it happens. Stuff happened, life happened, and instead of becoming an author, I found myself becoming something else. I became a journalist. And here I am being a journalist. This is a picture of me covering a story. I wrote a story. I don't even remember what the story was about, but I interviewed this man, and he said, do you want to see something? And he took me into his backyard, and he had a pet lion. And this is a picture of me meeting the lion. And I thought that was really, really interesting. Being a journalist was a really fun job to do because I met so many people, and I learned so much about people. I learned that people said things, but they didn't do what they said that they would do. I learned that people had secrets. I learned that all kinds of things about people that was really, really useful when I began to design characters for my own books. I learned that people are made out of a lot of pieces. It's almost like building a jigsaw puzzle. So I create this character. My characters are like jigsaw puzzles with many parts. And the parts sometimes contradict each other. But one important thing when you're designing a character is you have to make sure that one piece of the jigsaw is missing. The technical term in fiction is the lack. The lack is something that is missing from your character's life. Think of Harry Potter. Harry Potter becomes a boy wizard. What is missing from Harry Potter's life? He is missing his parents. He hasn't got parents, which is really, really sad. And so a lot of the emotions of Harry Potter is driven from being an orphan and wanting to have his parents back. Think about Shrek. Remember Shrek? So Shrek, it opens up and he's taking a bath in mud and farting all over the place and having a great time. And then he's forced to leave his home. And he has to go and have an adventure. And what is missing in Shrek's life? Home. Home is missing in his life. And then in the end, well, you have to watch it. In the end, he finds home somewhere else. And it's in another character that travels with him. So I had to write characters that had things missing in their jigsaw puzzle. So when I wrote my first book, Tall Story, which is about a boy who becomes a giant, I was thinking about the earthquakes that I grew up with in the Philippines. In the Philippines, there are a lot of earthquakes. Here's an earthquake I prepared for you earlier. And whenever there were earthquakes, my dad used to say, "Don't worry about the earthquake. Don't worry. It's just the giants playing around under the ground." I think we were meant to not be scared, although that sounds really scary. But wherever there are earthquakes, people believe that the landscape must be alive. Look at this picture. Can you see the giants in the picture? So those people are walking along, minding their own business, and then the giants start wrestling. And when they wrestle, the earth is moving, and those people are like, "Oops, earthquake!" And what they don't know is there are giants under the ground. So I was thinking about that, and I thought, okay, I'm going to write a story about a boy who becomes a giant. And he's the smallest boy in his class, and then he becomes a giant, and I had to figure out how he became a giant. And I found out about this other boy. His name is Robert Wadlow. Robert Wadlow was 8 foot 11 inches tall. But when he started out, he was a tiny, normal boy. At one point, he begins to grow, and he can't stop growing. And he's sick. He suffers from a disease called gigantism, when his pituitary gland can't stop releasing growth hormones. So he grows and grows and grows, and he becomes a giant. And that is what my character has. In Tall Story, he becomes a giant because he has gigantism. In my picture book, Is It a Mermaid? I read a story about how the sailors from Europe traveled over to Asia back in the 16th century and reported that they saw mermaids in the shallow waters of the Philippines. And do you want to see the mermaid that they saw? Because it wasn't a mermaid, it was an animal. Let me show you what the mermaid was that they saw. Okay, this is the mermaid they saw. Does it look like a mermaid? Is it a mermaid? I bet you can't even guess what it is. Is it a seal? No, it's not a seal. Is it a walrus? It's not a walrus. Walrus have long teeth. And is it a whale? It's not a whale. It's not as big as a whale. It's not a dolphin. It's something else. So it looks like a manatee. You remember the manatees are really, really cute. But manatees are American. They live in America. And they don't look like mermaids because their tails are shaped like paddles, like little round shovels. And this creature didn't have round paddle tails. This creature had mermaid tails, the tails shaped like a mustache. It's called a dugong. We call it in the Philippines and elsewhere in Asia, the dugong. Dugong is the Malaysian word for mermaid. And this is what the sailors saw. They must have been traveling for a long time if they thought this was a mermaid. Anyway, I wrote a story about these two kids hanging out on the beach in the Philippines. And one day they see this creature in the water and they say, "I know what you are. You are a dugong." And the creature says, "I'm not a dugong, you silly little boy in a vest. I am a beautiful mermaid." And the whole story is this debate between them about whether she is a mermaid or not. And what is the missing jigsaw puzzle piece in my characters? In the children, they don't believe that she's a mermaid, but she wants to be a mermaid. So there's that jigsaw puzzle thing happening again. I wrote another book, which is a ghost story, Shine. And the story is about a girl whose mother has died. And She lives on this island where people believe that if you light a candle in the window, it's going to summon ghosts. And so this girl lights a candle in the window every night because she wants to see her mom again. And one day there's a knock on the door, and it's her mom. Anyway, her missing piece, her lack, is the lack of a mom. Every character has to have a lack. Now, let's go back to my Once Upon a Time. In my Once Upon a Time, when I was growing up in the Philippines, we had this, we were ruled by a dictator. I don't know if you've ever heard what a dictator is. A dictator is somebody who really likes power. So we had this president, his name was Marcos. He really liked being president. So he decided that he was going to stay president for the rest of his life. And that was really, really hard for our country because whenever anyone disagreed with him, he just had them shot. And I have some relatives who were harmed by his government. And whenever he needed money, he just stole it from the Philippine treasury. And the Philippines became poorer and poorer and poorer, and something had to give. So we had a revolution. And here's the revolution. All the people came out in the streets and demanded that Marcos step down from power. And by that time, I was a grown-up, and I'm in that crowd right there. And I often watch movies of the revolution hoping to catch glimpses of me because I didn't have any film in my camera. Throughout the revolution, no one would share their film with me, so I have no photographs of myself. But I do have this photograph. This is a cover magazine of Asia magazine, which was a magazine I once wrote for. But in that cover is a face that doesn't look like anyone else's. So if you look really, really closely at that cover, all the Filipinos are celebrating. That's what the Philippine flag looks like. And down below is a white face, a white man. And his name was Richard Gourlay. And I met Richard Gourlay during the revolution. It was so romantic. Oh, it was really lovely. And we fell in love. It's disgusting. We fell in love. And so we got married. And here's a picture of us getting married. And it's so lovely getting married to Richard Gourlay. He's not wearing an English suit. He's wearing a Filipino marriage suit called the Barong Tagalog. And it is made out of bananas. Can you believe it? He wore a banana suit at our wedding. Anyway, we had a lovely wedding, and we were off to live happily ever after. So I just told you the story of how we met. And that is another thing that I learned about. You know, one of the most important parts of a story is how the characters meet each other. And it's one of my most favorite things to write is the moment when two characters meet. I think today they call it a meet cute. And I think like my meeting with Richard, my husband, was a real cute meet. It's a meet cute. And every single one of my stories have a meet cute. So meet cute, cute meet. I'm beginning to lose. So for example, in my book, Bone Talk, which is that book up there, I don't know if the camera is catching it. It's the black and white book up there. Bone Talk is about a historical moment in the Philippines when we were invaded by the United States. And the hero of Bone Talk is a little boy who has never been outside his village. He's never seen anybody who's not like him. And when the United States invades, suddenly Americans begin to turn up in his village. And he's never seen a white man before. And so suddenly they turn up, and there are these men with skin the color of buffalo milk and hair the color of straw. And they've got eyes the color of the sky. I mean, if you've never seen it before, it must be really, really scary. And they're double the size. They're really tall. And so it's like a really, really scary moment. I enjoyed writing that moment in the book. There's also in Mike Falls Up, which is another book I have. Let me point at it. It's just by the tentacle over there. Oh, this is my friend, by the way. Can you see it in the camera? That is my favorite octopus friend. His name is Michael Morpargo. Mike Falls Up is a beginning reader that I wrote. And in Mike Falls Up, Mike lives in the Philippines. There's an earthquake, and the earth opens up in front of him. He falls into the hole, down, 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 right through the center of the earth, and then shoots out a chimney in London. And he meets a little girl in London. It's snowing outside. That's a really nice meet cute, right? It's such a fun thing to write. And I thought that today I would read you the meet cute from my first book, Tall Story. So where is that? Oh my God, I've lost it. Oh, here it is. Here we go. All right. This is the meet cute and tall story, which is the story of Bernardo, who lives in the Philippines. His mom goes off to London to work as a nurse. There are lots of Filipino nurses in our hospitals here in England. And for many, many years, Bernardo cannot get the visa to travel and join his family in the UK. In the meantime, his sister, his little sister, is growing up in the UK and has never met him. What he does is he keeps a secret. He doesn't tell them that while they've been away, he has been growing. He has turned into an 8-foot-tall giant. And this is the moment when his sister Andy meets him for the first time in Heathrow. He steps off the plane, and she's expecting to see an ordinary boy, and instead she meets an 8-foot-tall giant. The book is told in both their voices, in Andy's voice and in Bernardo's voice. So this is Andy. He was massive. No, not massive, because he actually looked slight, if you could call a giant slight. Slight, like it would take a tiny gust to blow him over. Slight, like a long straw, all air and no structure. Slight, like an empty suit dangling from a hanger. A very long suit. His shoulders were round and he was stooped. Everything about him was lanky. His arms, his legs, his hair. Who cut his hair? It was horrible. Chopped around his ears like a jigsaw. And don't get me started on the suit, made of some kind of shiny nylon. And the tie that hung like it had been pasted on with Velcro. It was pasted on with Velcro. On his feet, he wore some deeply ugly sandals with black socks. His face was all angles, like the bones had grown all wrong, his cheekbones too sharp for a boy's face. And then, when he spoke, oh, that voice, he sounded like he was under water. He sounded like he had the treble turned off. He sounded like Dad's prehistoric CD Walkman with a flat battery. And yep, he was tall. I mean, did Mom actually think she was preparing me to meet this giraffe by bleating, "He's tall, Andy," every few minutes? Lame, lame, lame. I hope you enjoy that, and I hope you read Tall Story someday. Tall Story is now 16 years old. Some of the children who first read it are now adults. It's amazing to think of it, and I hope you read it too. Okay, so now we've got time for some questions. Shall I start taking questions? I've got this magic bowl filled with, and the people are writing questions in the schools, and when they say abracadabra, the questions pop up in my bowl. It's incredible magic. Thank you, BookTrust, for creating this incredible magic. All right, now I am going to open up this bowl and take a question. Are you ready? All right, who sent the first question? Farringdon Community. Hello, Farringdon. Thank you for sending me a question. It says, after growing up in the Philippines and moving to England, what would you say are the biggest culture differences between the two countries? Okay, this is like a book. Are you wanting me to write a book on air? Because I could write like a whole book about our biggest cultural differences. But I will tell you one which immediately struck me. So I told you that I have 6 kids in my family, right? And that was fairly common in my time. But in the Philippines, one of the things that I noticed that was really different was that people live in a kind of, we're very communal in a way that English people are not. English people are very individual. You kind of have this, your own space. Space is really important. Boundaries are really important. Having your own time, your space. It's really, really hard to describe. Whereas in the Philippines, it's always us. We are a we, and we will always do things. When we travel, when I go visit my family, we go everywhere together. We'll go to the restaurant together, go to the supermarket together. And you can imagine this is a huge my family is huge now because my siblings, of course, they've all gotten married. They've all got kids. But we're always together. At every meal, it's like a massive party. Can you imagine the dishwashing? And so, there's a kind of plus and minus to it. So the plus is that we love being together, and the minus is that there's a lot of dishwashing. And I kind of miss that because people are very independent here in the UK. You like going off and doing your own stuff. I love being around people, and I love doing things together. And so, and one of the things that happens when you do things together is that we come across, when people visit the Philippines, they say, why are the Filipinos so friendly and so helpful? Well, I think it's because we've got that communal mindset. You can especially see it when we're doing karaoke. So when I go home, we will do karaoke until 4 in the morning. And it's not just solo singing, it's like the whole group will be singing. And it's fearless and nonstop. So, okay, I better ask another question. Get another question? Okay, here I've got another one. Let's look at them. St. George's School. Hello, St. George's School. Who was your favorite character to create and why? If you read all of my books, you will notice that there is one character in every book that is kind of similar. It's usually a girl character, and the girl character kind of usually sounds a little bit like me. So there's a little bit of me in every one of my books. So in Tall's story, there's a girl called Andy who loves playing basketball and has a kind of, she has a kind of voice that, well, sounds a little bit like me. And in Bone Talk and in Wild Song, there's a character that is a little bit of me in it. So I think she must be my favorite character because she's me. Okay, another question. Here we go. Oh, I don't know how to pronounce this school. Dayrite Primary Academy. If I mispronounced your school's name, I apologize profusely. Okay. Who inspired you to start writing, and whose books do you recommend everyone should read? Oh, that is such a hard question. So hard. Dayrite Primary Academy School. Dayrite. Okay, who inspired me to start writing? Books inspired me to start writing. I just love reading books, but I read hundreds and hundreds of books. I can't just say just one of them. And I read good books and bad books. So because I love reading books that are badly written as well, because I love looking at it and thinking and analyzing, why am I not enjoying this book? It's really fun to figure that out. So I love reading all kinds of books. And I think and I cannot recommend that you read the books that I love, because I am me and you are you. And you might not like the books that I like. Like I find horror really, really hard to read. Apart from, I do like some horror. I love this horror book called The Girl Who Had All the Gifts, which starts with a girl in a 10-year-old girl in a jail. And she's really happy in that jail, and she's really excited. And then a man comes along, and he's got a wheelchair. And he puts the girl in the wheelchair and straps her to the wheelchair. Maybe I shouldn't be telling this story. This is a horror story. And then he takes her to a classroom, and all the other children are strapped to wheelchairs. And her favorite teacher is up, and they have a lesson. And then it turns out they're all zombies. And the story is about how this zombie girl, something happens and they all are released and there's this zombie apocalypse. And it's a horror story, but I thought it was really a wonderful story. And it's called The Girl Who Had All the Gifts. I love that book. If you like horror, try that one. But everybody has a different taste in books. So and also your taste changes. When I was a teenager, I loved romance. Oh, I just read all the Mills and Boon. In those days, the Mills and Boon was really, really tame. They didn't even kiss. But my favorite kind of Mills and Boon was the ones where they had where the characters lost their memories. So one moment she knows who everyone is, and then she loses her memory. She doesn't know why this guy that she has a crush on hates her. And then the whole story is about figuring out why this guy hates her, and then in the end they fall in love. I mean, I just love that kind of story. And today I kind of like, I like reading so many things. So what I suggest is that you try something out, try something that you would never pick up. If you don't like it, put it down, try another thing, because you need to find out what you love. And when you find out what you love, then you know what you're going to read for the rest of your life. Thank you for that great question. Okay, here's another question, and it's from, does this say Hogwarts? I have a question from Hogwarts School, from a certain HP. Okay, how old were you? Oh, come on. Questions that start with how old were you are very hard to answer. How old were you when you became a published author, and how long have you been writing for? Somebody who likes maths. Well, I'm not going to answer that. How old was I when I became a published author? I had already had my children. My daughter was 10 years old. Okay, that's all I'm going to say. And then, how long have I been writing for? I can tell you that I have been writing for many years, because I started when I was about 6 years old. I began writing for my sister Mia's newsletter. It was called Stork News, and we would release this newsletter every week to my mother, who was our only reader, and we'd type up the news about, and the news was mainly about our dogs. So I started when I was 5 years old. I've been writing for a long, long time. Okay, let's have another one. What school is this? What is this? St. Trinian's. St. Trinian's, you know what St. Trinian's? How did it feel when you became a published author? You know, becoming a published author is like a series of anticlimaxes. I don't know if you know what an anticlimax is. It's like when you're waiting and waiting for something to happen. And then when it happens, it's not very exciting anymore. So I was waiting and waiting to get published. And then I get a call from my agent saying, this publisher wants your book. And I'm like, yay, yay. But it's going to take a year for it to get published. Oh, okay. So I wait for a year, and then the book gets published, and a year has passed, and I've forgotten my story, and I'm already writing another book. So when the book comes out, I'm going, yay, my book's come out. But I'm really busy thinking about the other book. And that's the kind of how publishing is. So you spend all your time doing something, creating the book. And then when it comes out, it's a little bit of an anticlimax, because you have to wait long periods of time for things to happen. And it's cool. What you do is you celebrate every tiny thing. So somebody knocks on my door and says, Candy, I just read your book. I'm like, yay, break out the champagne. Somebody read my book. It's so exciting when somebody reads your book. Thank you for your question. Another question, look at this. What was your job before you became an author? Well, I said I was a journalist, but journalism doesn't pay very much. I was paid so little that I had to do a lot of jobs. Now, one of the things that I did really, really well when I was growing up in the Philippines was I watched a lot of TV, and I practiced speaking English like the TV. So I would copy all of these, and all the TV was American. So I had this really good American accent. And when they used to make movies in the Philippines, some movies would have American characters, and they could only afford to film the American character during the week that they're there, and then they couldn't afford to keep them. So later on, when they needed to do the sound of the movie, they wouldn't have an American to speak the words. And that was one of my jobs. I did the American voices. You would watch the film and try to speak at the same time as the video, putting in the words of the characters. That's one of my jobs. I also drew a comic strip. I loved drawing, and for a long time in the Philippines, I had a comic strip in a magazine. Today, I'd really love to draw again. I've been writing for so long, and actually right now I'm doing a lot of comics and really enjoying it. What other job did I do? I also wrote scripts for people who are coming on stage. So, you know, you go up on stage if you're a nightclub singer, and you need to have a little spiel to say, say, good evening, everybody, I am blah, 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 say a joke. I used to write those things for them. And that paid me a few nickels and dimes, and that helped me get a daily meal. Okay, another question. This is from St. George's School. Again, thank you, St. George's School. How many books have you written in total? Oh, that's counting. Okay, counting, let's see. I've actually got most of my books here. I wrote, apart from one book, which was about animal tricksters, so that's one. Then I wrote the book Tall Story, which was a novel. And then I wrote Shine, which was the ghost story. Then I wrote Bone Talk. I wrote a book called Ferdinand Magellan. I wrote Wild Song, which just came out in March. I think that's 6. And I've also written short stories from short story collections. So yeah, about that many. Okay, and then here we go, another question. What is your best advice to any budding writers about getting published? So there are 2 parts to this question. Getting published is not just about trying to go and get someone to buy your book. It's about writing the book. And one of the important things, I think, for young writers is they need to become good noticers. That means you need to put down your phone, turn off the TV, and look around the world, because good writers are great noticers. They are people who watch the world. What are you going to write about if you're not looking around you? If you're basing everything on what you see on a device, that's not the real world. And the ideas have been recycled over and over because this is content that other people have created. So it's really, really important to live in the real world, to notice real things happening around you. And as for getting published, that is another book that you're asking me to write. And I think the getting published can come in many, many forms. You can get published in a book that is sold in a bookstore. You can get published on Instagram. You can get published yourself. You can like print your comic book and then go and hire a table in Comic-Con and sell your comics. There are so many ways to get published. And what you've got to do is to research the best way to get published in the way that you want to get published. So if you want to self-publish, research it. If you want to make comics and be in Comic-Con, then research it, because it's a fine art and it's a lot of work getting published. Okay, another question here. Look at this. Let's see. From all the characters you have created, which one is your favorite? Hey, that sounds just like the question earlier. And it's really tricky with characters. One of the things about being a writer is you get very, very close to your characters because you spend all your time with them. If it's your job to be with that character, that's like 24 hours you're thinking about the characters, you're dreaming about them. And so you get really, really close to them. So I don't dare actually say favorite, because it's like asking me, who is your favorite child? So I told you about how one character in every one of my books is like me, but actually all of them are so important to me whenever I'm writing them. Let's see. Oh, this question. Interesting. Do you find it hard writing books? Yes, it's so hard. It's so hard to write the books. Somebody said, writing is easy. All you have to do is sit in front of the computer and wait until the blood starts flowing from your brains. Well, it's not quite as bloody as that, but it means finding ideas, constantly having ideas, and finding words. And sometimes the words don't come. And so, but you have to love it enough to spend a lot of time with it. So when the words don't come, my advice to you is just write any old word. Write even though you don't think that your writing is going well. Just keep writing, because you can come back to something that you've written before and edit it. That's my advice. Okay, let's have a look at more questions. We've seen that question before. And now, what is my favorite book? Okay, favorite books. As I said before, it's really, really difficult. But I can recommend some authors to you who have been my favorite authors through the years. Frank Cottrell Boyce wrote a book called Millions, and it's an amazing book. The funny thing was, he made Millions. He made a movie called Millions, and the book came out almost at the same time. It's about a boy who finds a bag filled with millions of pounds, and something is happening in England, and he's got to spend all the money within a few weeks because the money is going to be worthless after that time. And the whole book is all about him trying to spend that money and how hard it is to spend money. And I thought that was the funniest and most wonderful book. And from the moment I read that book, I read everything that Frank wrote because it's all incredibly inspiring. The other author that I would recommend to you is Philip Reeve. I loved Philip Reeve's books called the Mortal Engines series. They're kind of sci-fi and fantasy. He also writes for younger people with Sarah McIntyre, who's my good buddy. We used to go to conferences together, and sometimes we ended up sharing a bed because there were only double beds in the hotels. So, but their books are so fabulous and so funny. I just love them. I am getting, I'm getting signals from people over here saying there's a woman going, apparently there's a question in here. Okay, here we go. Look, Sittingbourne School has asked a question. Hi, Sittingbourne School. And, Pill Primary. Hello, Pill Primary. How do you start a character? Oh, it's so hard, starting a character. When you start a character, sometimes you will have an idea for a character. So what you have to do is just start. And what is useful for me sometimes is I will start by describing what the character is doing. I'll write, this character is like this. Like literally, I don't try to write the book. I try to write how the book is going to be. This character is going to be funny, this character. So I'll just write that. I'll keep writing and writing. And then maybe I'll try doing a bit of dialogue. So I'll write things that the character will say. You know, like in my book, Tall Story, it begins with Andy in the train on her way to Heathrow to pick up Bernardo. And the train is crowded. And Andy says, so many armpits, so little deodorant. And that just like, I wrote that. That came to my head, like the voice was in my head. I wrote it down, and suddenly I had Andy's character. And I kept on writing, and Andy was so easy to write. It just came because of those words. And what you hope for is that that's going to happen, that the character will start speaking in your head. But this sometimes takes time, sometimes weeks, sometimes months. And you just have to give it the time that it needs so that the character will grow. And slowly, the more you write the character, the words are not going to be perfect initially. The more you write it, the more real the character becomes. And eventually, the character will be moving and talking on his own. So that's how it works for me, and sometimes it's different for everybody. Oh my God, the people in the back of the room behind the camera, they keep going, they're going like this. I don't know what that means. Sorry, I don't understand. Why are you doing this? Oh, they're pointing at their, why are you pointing? Oh, okay. I know exactly what they're telling me. Time is up. I'm so sorry. Time is up. It's time for you to go off and have your whatever, I think it must be break time now, have lunch or something. But I've had a great time talking to you, imagining you in your classrooms, imagining your teachers in funny hats. I do that a lot. But I've had such a wonderful time talking to you. I hope you enjoyed this presentation. And all you people who are joining us later, hello and goodbye. That's it from me.